Ladies and gentlemen, it is about that time for my next top 5 NBA list. The response to these have been so overwhelmingly positive. I am so grateful for you guys for reaching out to me and just saying how much you guys want these lists and you know how much you guys have liked them and it's just been great and you know again, I'm so grateful. I'm almost lost for words. So thank you guys so much. And I know I said last video that I'm probably gonna have to take a break from these, and I do mean that. You know, probably next week is gonna be the start of it, honestly. So you know, hopefully I'll get one out for you guys, but I might not be able to. But the reason for that is pretty simple. There's gonna be a lot more to talk about. In terms of football, and I really want to take a deep dive into the semifinal games. There's just too many playoff games to really go into. With the new playoff brackets and everything like that. So, I'm very excited for that. But in terms of our lists, just keep an eye out for those. I'm hoping to keep getting those out for you guys. But like I said, I might have to take a break from those here in the next couple of weeks. But in terms of this list, it's going to be my top 5 NBA teams that I feel should have won a championship. But obviously didn't win a championship. So, a couple of ground rules for this list. I tried to stick to individual teams, so from individual years, not necessarily a team era, although there is a couple of those in there just because I couldn't decide on one specific year for that team. If it was a team that, you know, lost in the playoffs or lost in the finals several years in a row or a few times in a handful of years and never ended up pulling through, whatever it is, you know, I tried my best to stick to an individual team from an individual year, but you will see, obviously, as we go into it, that there will be some more era teams going on there. Another rule for this list is it's all subjective, obviously, but what I did try to do was I tried to kind of have, you know, team talent play a factor into where they rank on the list as well. So if I think a team was, you know, really, really robbed or better than, you know, necessarily another team on the list, or had more talent on the team, then they're probably going to be ranked higher, although that's not always the case. But I did try to keep that as even as I could, so that it's not just teams that I enjoyed watching, because, you know, spoilers, some of these teams I was not alive to watch. Or I was way too young to remember watching. So it's one of those things where, you know, for me, I didn't want my own like enjoyment bias to get in the way or recency bias to get in the way, you know, like so hopefully you guys can understand that and it makes sense, because I know I probably didn't explain that as well as I probably could have, but point being, you know, skill level is going to play a part in what we're talking about. But I didn't want to have recency bias or my own enjoyment bias get in the way. So there's kind of a mixed bag there. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoy this list. Please, 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 let me know if I forgot anybody or if there's a team that you guys think should have been on here. If a team should have been higher, if it should have been lower. I'm going to have some honorable mentions. If one of the honorable mentions should have taken the place of one of the teams on the list. So, you know, whatever it is, please comment down below so that I can take that into consideration. If you guys have any ideas for lists that you want me to do, I would love to get some suggestions from you guys. So certainly if you guys have any lists that you want me to do, let me know in the comments section. Let me know on Twitter or on Facebook or anything like that, and I will certainly do my very best to get those things for you. And I'd love to interact with you guys on these lists. So, without further ado, let's get this thing started. With number 5 is going to be the 1972 Milwaukee Bucks. I obviously said a little bit earlier, some of these teams I was not alive to watch. This clearly is one of those teams. The Milwaukee Bucks in 1972 had a fantastic team. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Oscar Robertson, Lucius Allen, and Bob Dandridge, just to name a few. You know, Dandridge and Lucius Allen and Kareem, obviously, were 3 of the best defenders in the league at the time. This was an absolutely stacked Milwaukee Bucks team. They finished the season with over 60 wins. They were the number 1 seed in the East going into the playoffs, but in the finals they ended up running into an absolute buzzsaw in the Los Angeles Lakers of 1972, and so this team is largely forgotten about in history, and so I wanted to include them on this list. My number 5 best team that I feel like should have won a championship. Number 4, a much more recent example, the 2017 Houston Rockets. Now, this may be out of left field for some people because at this point, the Houston Rockets really don't have much of an identity. They are a team that is completely in just full rebuild mode. They don't really have a style of play that they necessarily do. They don't have any signature players. Obviously, a guy like Jalen Green is going to turn out to be a star, and he probably already is. But in 2017, the Houston Rockets were a lot of fun to watch. Obviously, for those of you who remember, James Harden, Chris Paul, Eric Gordon, Clint Capella. So, and that's just to name a few of the guys on that team. So, it was a lot of fun to watch this team. This team was one of those teams that really revolutionized the game of basketball in a lot of ways, and people don't really talk about it. Most people just give credit to Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and the Warriors for the three-point boom in the NBA, and rightfully so. They certainly earned a lot of that recognition because of how successful they've been. But right there with the Warriors at this time were the Houston Rockets. They were chucking up threes like it was nobody's business, and they were going in. And James Harden was establishing himself as one of the best players in the NBA and eventually would take home an MVP. But despite all that, it was, playoff time. And James Harden has that tag on him that he's not a big game performer and he can't play well in the playoffs. But at least for me, in my opinion, they had the best shot of beating the Warriors that year, and it showed when they played in the Western Conference Finals. I feel like if Chris Paul was not hurt, they would have won that series. But we all know the story. Game 7 rolls around. Houston Rockets at home go 0 for 27 in a stretch from 3. Just abysmal. Their three-point shot completely and utterly let them down. And it was heartbreaking for a lot of people because I feel like, honestly, the Rockets were a better team that year. And I feel like they could have won the championship had they made it there. And it didn't happen. And so they are number 4 on my list. Number 3, the 2002 Sacramento Kings. So the Sacramento Kings in 2002, it's very interesting to talk about now because, most people my age or definitely younger than me will sit there and think the Kings were good. Yes, the Kings were very, very good at one point, and which makes it even more heartbreaking, the fact that they really can't, figure it the heck out at this point in their franchise history. There's nothing that they have really been able to do that's been sustainable. But in 2002, their roster was absolutely loaded. Chris Webber, Peja Stojakovic, Vlade Divac, Mike Bibby, and that's just to name a few. They had a lot of talent on that roster. And at that time, there was only one king of the castle in the NBA, and that was the Shaq and Kobe Lakers. And the Kings knew exactly how to beat them. Throw a bunch of bodies at Shaq, make him shoot free throws. And their roster was perfectly built for that. They had several big guys that they thought would be able to help stop Shaq. And it looked like in the Western Conference Finals against the Lakers that it was going to work out. And then, one of the most famous and infamous, really, conspiracies in the history of sports ends up coming to fruition, where obviously disgraced referee Tim Donaghy comes out and says that particular series, Game 6 of that particular series, the Kings versus the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals, was rigged to the point where the NBA basically forced the Lakers to win that game. They ended up winning in Game 7, and there you go. Kings don't go to the NBA Finals. They instead go home, and People leave in free agency, people get traded, people underperform, people get older, and that's that. So, Sacramento Kings are left in the dust to history. And it's a shame because having gone back and watched this team more, because obviously at the time I was 5 years old, so couldn't really pay much attention to that kind of stuff. They were a lot of fun. Peja Stojakovic was a shooter in a time where being a shooter wasn't cool. Mike Bibby was one of the best and most in flashiest point guards in the NBA, and it was a lot of fun. Chris Webber is one of the most underrated power forwards of all time. He's definitely worthy of Hall of Fame status, but I don't think he gets a ton of love, as much love as he should, because unless I'm completely out of my mind, he never won a championship. He didn't really play on teams that were very good other than the 2002 and 2001-ish Sacramento Kings. So that team was a lot of fun to watch, and it's a shame that they never won a championship, so they are number 3 on my list. Number 2, the 1993 Phoenix Suns. So the 1993 Phoenix Suns, for those of you who do not know of it or remember, they lost to the Chicago Bulls in the NBA Finals, as literally everyone in the Western Conference did over a period of 7-ish to 8-ish to 9-ish, whatever it was, years in the 80s and 90s. But they were stacked, the Phoenix Suns were. Charles Barkley was the headline player on that team, one of the best players of all time. Kevin Johnson, who was very, very underrated, and still is, quite frankly, a fantastic player. Dan Majerle was also on that team, a very, very good scorer in his own right. And, of course, Danny Ainge, who typically came off the bench. But obviously, Danny Ainge is very famous for now being the former president of the Boston Celtics, and now I don't know if he's president of the Utah Jazz, but he is definitely up there making personnel decisions, director of personnel, whatever he is, over in Utah. And look at how good Utah is doing this year, so they're really killing it. So Danny Ainge on that team as well. Figured I'd give him a shout out. But anyway, the 93 Phoenix Suns were one of those teams that just dominated in the regular season, dominated in the playoffs, and then just ran into an absolute buzzsaw in the Chicago Bulls, and they had no answer for Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and the crew. So, there's not really a whole lot to say other than that. A fantastic team that ran into the greatest of all time and couldn't do anything about it. Not super, crazy or anything like that, but in terms of talent, this team was Charles Barkley's best chance of winning a championship. He's one of the most famous athletes and best athletes in any sport that never won a championship, and this was his best shot to do it. So wanted to give him a shout out here. They are number 2 on my list. So, you guys want to know who number 1 is? Well, before we do that, let's get into some honorable mentions. So I have a few here that I want to get into. The 2007 Phoenix Suns. So obviously back-to-back Phoenix Suns here, although obviously these guys just missed the cut of my list. So the Phoenix Suns at this time, this is one of my favorite teams of all time. I really wanted to put them on my list. I did. But here's the thing. As I said at the top of the video here, I did not want to have my recency bias or my fun bias really get in the way of this list. And when you look at the talent, the pure talent of this team, they don't match up as well as some of the other teams that I have already mentioned in terms of Hall of Fame status. They were great. A lot of players on this team were great for their day. But other than Steve Nash, there's not a whole lot of guys that were transcendently good. And even Steve Nash, you could argue if he was transcendently good or if he was just really, really good. I just think that the talent doesn't match up. So in terms of best team to never win a championship, they just missed my cut. But in terms of the most fun team to never win a championship, if that was this list, I'd probably put these guys at number 1. I loved watching the 2007 Phoenix Suns. They're one of my favorite teams of all time. They should have won a championship that year, and it just didn't happen, and it breaks my heart. Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire, Leandro Barbosa, Sean Marion, Boris Diaw, I'm forgetting somebody, Raja Bell, that's who I'm forgetting. Fantastic, deep team that was run and get out in transition and score a ton of points before it was really cool. Mike D'Antoni had that offense working swimmingly back in a time where that wasn't necessarily the best way to play basketball, but it was a lot of fun. So, what happened in the Western Conference, I believe semi-finals, I want to say, against the Spurs? They kind of got robbed. Steve Nash got body checked, and a couple of guys on their bench stepped out to help defend him. But there was a rule at the time, and I'm not sure it still exists. I think they've changed it now, where if you step on the court from the bench in an unauthorized way, you not only get a technical foul, but you get suspended for the next game. And that's what happened. Steve Nash got hurt from that check. I believe he broke his nose, a couple of players that were important for the Suns got suspended. They ended up losing the next game and then ended up losing the series. All the momentum of that game and of that series was completely wiped out from underneath them. And I think that was by far, Steve Nash's best chance to win a championship. Another one of those great players that never won a championship. It's really a tragedy. But yeah, 2007 Phoenix Suns, my first honorable mention. My number 2 honorable mention, the 1995 Orlando Magic. Another team that ran into the buzzsaw that is the Chicago... Oh, no, actually, no, they didn't run into the Chicago Bulls. Whatever it was, the Orlando Magic with Shaquille O'Neal, Penny Hardaway, Nick Anderson, Horace Grant, and the crew, they were really, really good. So yeah, I mean, it's tough to really argue against, Penny Hardaway, who I believe would have been a Hall of Famer had he been able to stay healthy. Horace Grant's one of the most underrated players of all time, and then obviously we don't have to talk about Shaq. I mean, Shaquille O'Neal's the most dominant force in the history of the NBA, arguably. So that was in his prime, and it's just a fantastic team. It ended up not amounting to anything other than runner-ups. The 2007 Dallas Mavericks, 2 2007 teams in my honorable mentions. I'm not going to lie to you guys because, I don't like to lie to you guys or to anybody, but I didn't put together that these two teams had happened in the same year. And it's just crazy that the Spurs ended up, winning that championship and everybody celebrates, but I think that two teams got absolutely bamboozled out of championships in that season. Obviously, the Dallas Mavericks being one of them. Dirk Nowitzki won an MVP in 2007. They won 67 games as a franchise that year. Unbelievable. And what happened to the Dallas Mavericks? Did they make it to the finals and lose? No. Did they make it to the Western Conference finals and lose? No. They didn't make it out of the first round of the playoffs. They lost to the Golden State Warriors, the 8 seed, with good old Baron Davis as their driving force. In the first round of the playoffs, lost to the 8 seed, and I think in 5 games, too. Like, it wasn't even a close series. The Golden State Warriors just took it to them. And so that definitely is one of the more famous teams to never win a championship. And so the Dallas Mavericks make my honorable mentions list. The 2005 Los Angeles Lakers. Now, this team, you could argue, oh, goodness, Tyler, they've won so many championships. Who cares about the Lakers? But you got to understand, this is a team that's coming off a three-peat, right? They're coming off winning 3 straight championships, and they are embarking on championship number 4, and they have a team that is basically the same team they had for their three-peat, with the addition of Gary Payton and Karl Malone. Now, obviously, both those guys were well past their prime. You're not getting prime Gary Payton, who was, nicknamed the Glove and most famously at least claims to be the guy that gave Michael Jordan the most problems, although Michael Jordan obviously doesn't feel that way, and who knows. And then Karl Malone. Some argue the best power forward of all time. I don't feel that way, but he's up there, certainly. He's definitely top 3. For 100% certain, he's top 3. So, me personally, I look at the 2005 Lakers team as the best of the Lakers teams that Shaq and Kobe were on, and they didn't win the championship. And what's crazy to me is they didn't win the championship because they lost to a juggernaut. They lost to a team that had no All-Stars on it in the 2005 Detroit Pistons. Now, to say that they don't have any All-Stars, that makes them sound like they're a bad team. No, 2005 Pistons are one of my favorite teams in NBA history because they beat a juggernaut Lakers team without really having anybody that was as good on that team as Kobe Bryant or Shaq. Big Ben Wallace, one of my favorite players of all time. Good defender, but couldn't play offense, and he was undersized for a center. But he won multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards. Obviously the great Chauncey Billups. Never going to be the best point guard in basketball, but was just so good for so many years. Rip Hamilton, a guy that, is very underrated in the history of basketball. Rasheed Wallace, a guy that is, again, another guy that's criminally underrated in the history of basketball. So many other guys on that team. Tayshaun Prince, another guy that was pretty good. So they didn't have, all-stars, but they had 5, 6, 7, 8, however many guys that were just really, really, really good, and they played as a team, and they played unbelievable defense, and they gave the Lakers fits in that series. So the Lakers, another team that I feel could have won a championship, but did not. And I clicked on the wrong one, so I apologize for you guys who saw that. My last team is the 90s Utah Jazz. And this is the one team, I know I said I was going to stick to individual teams, but I couldn't decide because the Utah Jazz in the 90s just got reamed by Michael Jordan. I mean, it's just one of those teams that, had obviously John Stockton, Karl Malone, two of the best players to ever walk the earth on the same team for a number of years, for a decade plus, and never won anything with it. And that's a shame because neither of those guys won a championship, even though they played together their whole careers, and they were really, really good. They won 60-plus games multiple times, number one seed in the West multiple times. They were not a bad team. Michael Jordan was just better, and that sucks. So I couldn't pick one team for these guys to, I couldn't pick one of the years to put on this list, so I basically just put all of them, and that is the end of my honorable mentions. So I hope you guys liked those, agree with those. Kind of already spoiled it because I accidentally hit the wrong button, but you know what? That's okay, because I feel like it's obvious, right? The answer is obvious for those of us who've watched basketball in the last decade, and I clicked on the wrong button again. I'm not doing okay today. No, it's fine. So the number one team is the 2016 Golden State Warriors. I mean, it's not even close for me. If they're not my favorite team that's never won a championship. If that was it, obviously the 2007 Phoenix Suns are going to be there. But in terms of the best teams to never win a championship, that's like if I were to make the same list for the NFL and not put the 2007 Patriots there. They literally went undefeated until the Super Bowl and didn't win the Super Bowl. They're the best team to never win the Super Bowl. That's just how it would work. Like there's no other team that I could possibly put. And for me, it's the same way. The 2016 Warriors, there's no other team that makes sense. 73 wins, the most wins in franchise history. It's just not close. They lost to the Cavs in the finals after blowing a 3-1 lead. And for me, again, they were they're considered maybe the best team ever. The best basketball team to ever walk the earth other than the Dream Team or the Redeem Team for the Olympics. Like, this is historically good basketball being played on a regular basis every night. Winning games without their starters, resting guys and still winning games. It was unbelievable to watch at the time. And so the fact that they did not win the championship after going 73-9, I think it's a no-brainer. The Golden State Warriors in 2016 are the number one team to not win a championship. Hey guys, me again. Thank you so much for watching one of my clips from the Lopes Goes Last podcast. These clips are so much fun to do. I absolutely love making them, and I absolutely love doing them. And this podcast is my baby. So I really want this thing to grow, and I really want it to succeed. So if you did like what you see, please subscribe. Also hit that bell notification so you never miss any one of my episodes or one of my clips like this one. And please do also like and share these videos with your friends and your family so that we can make this thing grow as fast as possible. And I wanted to thank you again so much. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video and have a great rest of your day.